عربيا لعلكم تعقلون نحن نقص عليك أحسن القصص بما أوحينا إليك هذا القرآن وإن كنت من قبله لمن الغافلين إذ قال يوسف لأبيه يا أبت إني رأيت 11 كوكبا والشمس والقمر رأيتهم لي ساجدين قال يا بني لا تقصص رؤياك على إخوتك فيكيدوا لك كيدا إن الشيطان للإنسان عدو مبين وكذلك يجتبيك ربك ويعلمك من تأويل الأحاديث ويتم نعمته عليك وعلى آل يعقوب كما أتمها على أبويك من قبل إبراهيم وإسحاق إن ربك عليم حكيم لقد كان في يوسف وإخوته آيات للسائلين إذ قالوا ليوسف وأخوه أحب إلى أبينا منا ونحن عصبة إن أبانا لفي ضلال مبين اقتلوا يوسف أو اطرحوه أرضا يخل لكم وجه أبيكم وتكونوا من بعده قوما صالحين قال قائل منهم لا تقتلوا يوسف وألقوه في غيابة الجب يلتقطه بعض السيارة إن كنتم فاعلين قالوا يا أبانا ما لك لا تأمنا على يوسف وإنا له لناصحون أرسله معنا غدا يرتع ويلعب وإنا له لحافظون قال إني ليحزنني أن تذهبوا به وأخاف أن يأكله الذئب وأنتم عنه غافلون قالوا لئن أكله الذئب ونحن عصبة إنا إذا لخاسرون صدق الله العظيم.
MashaAllah, that was very beautiful. MashaAllah, that was very beautiful. I must admit, when I come to Masjid Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, that's probably one of the most things that impresses me. Very, very outstanding recitations with the makharij beyond, mashallah, anjad, and I really mean it. This place really deserves to always be in the lead for every Quran competition. Anjad, Allahu Akbar. I'm very impressed. Rabbi yahfazkum jami'an. So I was actually asked to talk about a very important topic, which is challenges that youth face in the postmodern West. I know that some of the words here, you're like, what does that even mean? What does even postmodern West really mean? And it becomes a very confusing word sometimes when people don't really know what it is. But here's one thing. Ibn Taymiyyah said one very important thing. He said, what ilm really is learning how to understand and unlock the general terms and then put them in smaller terms and understand things at large and understand it when it's actually a complete thing. What does that even mean? You made things even harder than it is. So when, for example, I talk about school, I say school for a child, to his understanding, well, what is a school? So what do you say? Well, a school, they have students, there are teachers, there's the staff, we would learn, we would take classes, but still the child doesn't really understand until he actually goes there and gets an idea of what a school really looks like, right? Well, that's the same thing. The word school is basically a general term to mean a set of different things within the school. So therefore, when you take the word postmodernism, it basically is, think of it as the whole pot that the West right now really is living in. Why am I saying that? Because what today, most of you are between the ages of probably 13 and maybe 17, 19. All right, so here's one thing. What you see of America or the West today isn't necessarily what it was before. In other words, what it was before is really what got it into what it is today, and not what it is today that made the West. Now, this is important to remember. Why? Because oftentimes we confuse what previously had contributed to making something magnificent and between what it is right now. What you see of the West right now is totally different than what contributed to make the West an advanced place. What are we actually living in right now? So number one is that when I want to talk about the challenges, I just need to unlock, think of the school and think of how we want to explain school to a child. That's the same thing. I'm actually trying to explain what postmodernism is, what the Western thinking really stands on right now, that oftentimes, I'll give you an example. When I was your age, I was born and grew up right here in Minnesota. But here's one thing. During my time, all right, I'm 43 years old. During my time, to say just the word gay actually meant detention right on the spot. On where? Here in Minnesota. Right here in Minnesota. This whole curriculum, these things are introduced. This is actually all new. All of this is new. The way that family is ostracized, the way that individual is emphasized, this is all new. Now, why is this important to know? Because Islam is always focused, and even the Quran is always telling you, if you want to be free, you gotta make sure that you unlock the different ideas that are influencing you without you noticing. There are so many different ideas that are surrounding you. You wouldn't even recognize that that's an idea that is infiltrating your mind and indoctrinating you. And you start to think of it as, well, this is my opinion. It's no one else's. Without you recognizing there's so many different ideas, especially in your youth age, where you would not be capable of sifting these ideas of where they come from, the trace that they go back to, and definitely the implication that it has on your life. What do I mean by the implication? The influence, the consequence of that idea, and where is it taking me? Now, that's why when we look at right now, understanding the system, what today is what is seen as the West, if you don't really unlock it, you're just going to be a byproduct of it. You're going to be a byproduct of it if you don't actually yourself understand what it really consists of and where it's coming from. In other words, understanding the system is really what Islam is telling you to do. Islam is telling you, listen, I want you to be critical of the world around you, because if you are not critical, you just become a consumer. And by being a consumer, you're just blindly following a particular thing without you noticing. That's probably going to lead you into a very bad consequence without you recognizing. So what is the system right now? This is not me making this up, but the system really is a secular system. What do we mean by secular? Well, I mean, right now the West is basically saying, well, we're separating between the church and the state. We're basically generally an atheist system. It's a postmodern system. What is a postmodern? We're going to talk about that later on. It's a liberal system. We're going to just introduce these words, but later, it's kind of like school and trying to unlock what school is. Now, here's one thing, is that what is at stake is that Muslims and Muslim students are right now focusing on studying secular education rather than studying Islam. What does that actually result in? That actually results in making them more prone to absorbing the Western / secular culture actually have their identity. In other words, whether you like it or you don't, you're going to be influenced without you recognizing. In order to not, you only have one way, which is first unlocking the system to figure out what you're going to sift, what you're going to take out, and what you're going to take in. What we're seeing right now, the result, there are more filled, Muslims are more filled with a non-Muslim identity than actually a Muslim identity. This is a reality. It's not an issue of hijab. It's what is actually hijab. It's just an outer part. But what is really crucial of scrutiny, really what's inside your brain. That's why even Islam was always talking about aqidah. In fact, out of the 6,236 ayah, you've got only 700 talk about legislature, and the rest are actually talking about aqidah, creed. What does that mean? It means what's inside is even more important, because that's what affects your behavior, and that's the vision. The vision that's inside your mind is really what's going to contribute in making your identity. And what is at stake is that we're actually seeing more Muslims becoming filled and indoctrinated with the non-Muslim identity / the postmodern secular liberal identity than actually the Muslim identity. Why? Because most of them don't even know what it is. They become the consumers because they don't even know the ingredients in that product. When you don't know what the ingredients looks like, you just consume it and you're like, I'm just going to eat it. It tastes good anyways. Without us noticing, we're just taking in so many different poisoned ingredients and we're just thinking, well, it just tastes good. It feels good. I'm just going to take it. And just like when we say, you are what you eat, you are what you think. What goes inside is really the truth about your identity. The reality is, yes, we've got a lot of our students, a lot of the Muslim community is actually going to Western universities. And of course, I'm not against going there, but I am concerned. I've actually worked as a chaplain at St. Catherine University for 3 years. To be honest, I didn't go there because I needed a job. I went there to see what is going on within the Muslim community that's making a lot of our students get absorbed on campus. What we're seeing is that many are falling in many cracks in trying to obtain a degree. They're trying to obtain a degree. They're trying to get to a certain level in education because, one, well, the society is doing a good job in marketing that in order for you to be called successful, you need to get this degree. And to get the degree, you have to somehow show that you were capable of absorbing and simply exactly saying what they were trying to tell you to say, especially when we're talking about the humanities. Now, here's one thing. You also see that torn students between maintaining their identity and between trying to get the grades and even understanding social skills, or at least the social interaction on campus. Well, not only are the non-Muslims a challenge, but believe it or not, even the Muslim students are a challenge. Even the Muslim students are a challenge. Why? Because the Muslim students, the majority, not know how to sift between a Muslim identity and a non-Muslim source or an identity. So what we end up is that Muslims also thinking in the same way as saying, well, when we talk about truth, you cannot be judgmental. Why? Because it regarded, well, there's no absolute truth at one point. Now, here's one thing, is that in Islam, there is absolute truth. And therefore, there is a way to get to that truth. What is the way? Number one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you the intellect to identify truth, but even your intellect can manipulate you and you can confuse the different truths. Or you can confuse different things and you could easily get manipulated. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, I want you to recognize most of the societies throughout history, they follow speculation. They think that it's called education. They think it's called, I'm using my mind, I'm using my intellect, I'm being smart. But in reality, it's just doubt. The second piece of what contributes within making a culture in the society, and the second piece is really is really desire. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes the story easy for you, tells you, listen, I want you to look into societies around you. You will be given lots of material, whether that is people talking about it and presenting it as a narrative or people presenting it like it is the absolute truth. They'll present it to you that it is based on intelligence, experience, and the list goes on and on. And, or they will present it that, well, it's basically what makes us feel good. Therefore, it should be regarded as the right thing to do, which is al-hawa, desire. It's exactly what lobbying is doing right now. Now, that's why when you see the postmodern aspect, it usually, and in fact, all of the time, it focuses on emotions. And then, of course, uses the word of play. We were doing a wedding a few days ago for one of my cousins, Friendly Community Center. In comes a man. And we just all stood and we were like, wait a minute, what is going on? She's a hijabi, you need to leave. He said, I identify as a woman. And we said, identify as a woman, identify whatever you want. We identify you one thing, now leave. Now here's one thing. Well, we know that that exists in American culture, so big deal. The person that was in defense for all of this and kept on getting so angry that we should not use the word he must leave and use the pronoun he was actually a hijabi Muslim woman. Yes, she was his boss and she said, don't use the word he or the pronoun he, and you need to respect the choices that she's making. And you said, she is making? Why don't you respect the choices that we're making? We rented the hall, and as Muslims, we want to practice our faith, and we would like him to leave. Got really angry. Now here, all these, with all this paradox, I find it rather ironic, not that he identified as he only, she only, but that it's a Muslim hijabi that totally didn't understand and was totally defending that we should not impose our ideas. Now, why? Because it's all about emotions. The society, you should just respect my emotions, and you therefore, it's all about cultural relativism. I'll identify as a female, I'll identify as a male, and I'll identify as a pronoun they, and you have to accept that. Why? Because it's all not about looking at the reality of truth, but it's all about creating new truths, even if they contradict the reality of what the world in what we see in nature. Now, here's one thing. You could see that there's that focus, that everything is relative, all about denying that there's anything absolute, whether in nature or whether denying anything absolute to being that there is something called right and wrong, justice or not justice, etc. It's all about emphasizing that and using tolerance to accepting and calling truth not truth, but only their definition of truth. If you say something else, and if you stand up and actually say, well, wait a minute, you wanted to choose your truth, what about my truth? Then they'll use this type of, I would say, making you afraid. So they'll call you things like, oh, you're being homophobic. Oh, you're being judgmental. Oh, and they'll use all these different words to make you afraid to support even the truth. Now, here's one thing. What they will refuse to call what they're doing as terror, but they will use the word terror to identify you. The second that you would say, well, wait a minute, no, this is wrong and this is true. They'll say, no, you're imposing your ideas. Aren't you imposing your ideas? But here's what happens. A lot of the Muslims, they really believe that lie. They really fell in that crack and really believe that if it's Muslim religious based, that it's going to be some form of extremism, not what is practiced by them. A lot of Muslims, believe it or not, the ones to really respect and tolerate, even when I was working at St. Catherine University, was actually the staff. The university was embracing a lot of the different things that I was saying in regards to even the sensitive topics like LGBT on campus. The ones to stand against me is the Muslim MSA. That's the reality. The ones to stand against me is the Muslim MSA. Is the MSA to actually say, we want to be inclusive. So Aysha was stepped down and got a Buddhist to replace me as an advisor. Now, why? They said, we want to be inclusive. لا إله إلا الله. Look at this. The play of words and how if the SA is right now the one to act against its own self. And this is really sad because what we're actually seeing is that Muslims themselves are actually losing their confidence in their identity. Why? A lot of it is because the power of using narratives. All about love. Oh, there's always the talk of the emotion and not the reality of whether this is right or wrong. It's always the talk using a narrative, using emotions. And then what you're seeing, it's all about the way where you define and recreate new realities by using language. Recreate new realities. Yes, maybe he's a male, but we can recreate a new way of saying we identify differently. We can use a different way where we say it's a love relationship. We can use a different way where we can talk about different things instead of the realities. We can recreate new language, new emotions, new narratives in order to somehow, and this is very important, in order to manipulate the masses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ لَيُوحُونَ إِلَىٰ أَوْلِيَائِهِمْ. Shayateen, they're going to inspire their followers. What? زُخْرُفَ الْقَوْلِ غُرُورًا. They'll just give them a type of a narrative that might actually seem very attractive. And إِنَّ مِنَ الْبَيَانِ لَسِحْرًا. Some of the words, the way that you would put it in eloquence, it sounds very attractive. It might seem, and believe it or not, sadly to say, women tend to be probably the most important consumers for wordplay. We love hearing that type of emotional language, so we tend to buy it. We tend to buy these narratives a lot more than the guys because it sounds fascinating, and to our ears, it sounds emotional. زُخْرُفَ الْقَوْلِ غُرُورًا. It takes us away into really deluding the masses, manipulating the masses without us recognizing. And then comes in political correctness. What is political correctness? Well, we don't want you to be offensive. So we'll use a different type of political correctness in where we want you to use this type of language where it is all fluid. Where it's all fluid. So what happens, it's all about taking away the realities by using some form of hypocritical language. It's a society of hypocrisy without us recognizing. Islam tells you, no. I want you to analyze, and I want you to understand that you cannot jump from reason to emotions. Why? Because the second you jump from reason to emotions, you're manipulating yourself. Now, here's another thing, is that in the age of postmodernism, it's actually jumping from faith to myth. Right now, it's becoming very common people to use words like, well, I'm actually getting the vibe of the energy, the vibe from the universe and all of that type of language. And believe it or not, we're seeing more Muslim students actually enter the universities and use this kind of language like I'm getting a vibe from the universe, it's positive energy, I'm believing in myself, all this kind of language without them recognizing, listen, are you just using words blindly without even recognizing where they're coming from? So they basically presented it, the society, the postmodern society made it seem like if you adhere to a faith, you're backwards. But then in order to present that you're a person of good mental health, you basically join yoga, you basically speak about positive health, and it sounds very attractive. Be careful. right now, a lot of the myths that are right now presented as education or as it is something to be healthy, as it's a way of introducing the realities in a different way, as if it's a way to give you a healthy mind, a healthy self, etc., is actually done through a lot of the mental health programs. And I mean it. I'm not saying mental health programs are all that, but I'm saying a lot of it is sold through these programs, exactly like a lot of the LGBT programs are sold within a package anti-bullying. That's exactly the same way. In using the slogan that it is to give you mental health, that's where they go in to present a lot of the postmodern myths, and a lot of it is actually taking and absorbing a lot from the Eastern religions. And why, by that, I would mean Buddhism, and I would mean Confucianism, and the list goes on and on. I do have a lecture that talks about the mental health and so forth. So what is actually the reality right now? Let's unlock postmodernism. Well, postmodernism has a aqidah and also has a sharia, just like Islam. There's aqidah and there's a sharia. There's the thought and there's the practice of the thought. How do I actually implement it on ground? The aqidah of it is atheism. The aqidah of it is atheism. What is atheism? Well, atheism regards, well, that life is just matter in motion. It's just matter going into motion, nothing after it. There's no purpose to life. God doesn't exist. In fact, nothing exists. It's just matter. There's no purpose to it. In other words, you and the animals are really the same. It's just a matter in motion. You're just a bunch of dust together, and evolution just made you, and you are. And that religion is based on myth. Therefore, it regards that only atheism is based on facts. Everything in religion is based on myth, and therefore there's no truth to life except one truth, that there's no truth. And they'll call you a terrorist if you would actually say Islam is the truth, and that life is plain contradiction with no purpose. Postmodernism, in its understanding and its aqidah, is really atheism. In its laws, it's secularity, where you have to separate between religion and state. And in culture, it's all postmodernism, in where you're seeing that postmodernism in itself is actually a religion without us recognizing. Because once you use the word truth, then that actually means you regard it as a way of life. That means there's a foundation, and even atheism would actually be considered a religion. Why? Because it has its idea of Genesis, of how the world was created. It has its idea of what laws should look like. And it has an idea and a definition of what the purpose of life existed and how the end of life is going to happen. In other words, at the end of the day, it's actually a religion. Now, making postmodernism is really the modern idolatry. It's the modern idolatry without us recognizing. We would think that idolatry was once upon a time. Well, it's actually not. Idolatry is still practiced today. You got Qawm Lut, they exist today. That was their idolatry. You have the interest of Qawm Shu'aib, you got it right here. You have the type of the idolatry where it's, we're just going to follow our whims. It's the same thing. You've got it today. And the list goes on and on. Knowledge in our modern times, you've got, it stands on relativism, individualism, pragmatism, existentialism. All of them equal atheism. I know for most of you, you're like, what do these words and these isms really mean? I'm going to explain it. I'm on niqabi, so please don't take photos of me, please. When you actually look at these isms, Remember school and how we're breaking it down. I'm going to break down each and every single one of these. So pay attention, because what you're not going to recognize is that if you don't unlock these isms, you're just consuming it. And that's why when you look at these ones, I want to remember the most important ones are really the relativism, individualism, and existentialism. Relativism, from its name, it's a relative thing. There's no truth. It's just each and every single one. You choose your own truth. We don't talk about that. Individualism, where the center is really the individual, not the society you choose. It's you that decides and determines truth. Existentialism, you make the reason for your existence. Look at the word existence, okay? You make the reason for your existence, you assign the existence, and at the end of the day, there's no truth. It's just you making the truth, you creating a reason for your existence. You create your own purpose. Now, here's one thing. These ideas, let's look into it really quick. So individualism basically emphasizes the moral worth of the individual. Existentialism, it's always particularizing that you individual, you decide and determine what is worthy of being a purpose. In pragmatism, if it works for you, who cares about everyone else? It works for you, as long as you're comfortable with, you should be okay. Don't worry about everyone else. If it works for you, don't worry about your mom, don't worry about your dad, don't worry about all of that. It works for you, just keep going. It's just you. And without us realizing, a lot of these things, they actually are hidden within the culture. So when you see when there's that only focusing on the individual, and then you're basically seeing that, especially the liberal ethics, where keep in mind that the system is actually a secular system, where it's not going to say that the religion is going to be the center, or at least the lens that we would observe things, but it's going to be you. It's going to be your desires. It's going to be what you consider is important to you. And therefore, it's basically all that where you're just not recognizing that the school, universities, public media, public libraries, public lifestyles is all really indoctrinated by the so-called education of freedom of speech, when in reality, there's actually a certain area. There are certain areas, there are certain lobbies that are paying big money to schools, universities, the system, the media, the whole society right now, all of the sudden flipped upside down, because it's the Benjamin, it's the money. It's the money. Without you recognizing, you become nothing but a consumer. If you're not aware that you're becoming a consumer, in their eyes, them, you're a consumer and we need that customer, then you're not recognizing your worth and your value. Because if you're an easy person to just, I'll just consume it all up and I'll just take it thinking, and it's exactly like Fir'aun. You know what Fir'aun was doing? Fir'aun was like, about Prophet Musa. Now, mind you, Fir'aun, the guy that was killing babies, is right now using the slogan about Prophet Musa in order to confuse the masses. He was telling the masses, إِنِّي أَخَافُ أَن يُبَدِّلَ دِينَكُمْ أَوْ أَن يُظْهِرَ فِي الْأَرْضِ الْفَسَادِ. This is who? This is Fir'aun. What was he saying? I fear that this man might change your religion, or he might cause and bring in destruction to a society. Ladies and gentlemen, we had actually built a great and a magnificent civilization. We definitely do not want this man to come and destruct it for us. About who? About Prophet Musa. City of civilization, bro, you were the guy that was killing babies, remember? But the masses did actually believe him, believe it or not. The masses believed him and they consumed it. Because after all, he had the media outlets, he had the money, he had the politics. And right now, the society is actually living the age of Fir'aun again. They control the politics, they control the education, and they control the media. And without you noticing, we're seeing Fir'aun speak of human rights. Fir'aun speaking of fair distribution. Fir'aun speaking of freedom. What? Fir'aun speaking of civilization. Fir'aun. That's the same age we're living in. But then, if you want to be aware, you have to make sure that you're able to break down the type of rhetoric that is being used in order to not get manipulated. Individualism, where focus on your personal interest. It's you that matters, even when you seek therapy, and the therapist would actually not recognize that a lot of these therapists have absorbed the type of rhetoric, the same exact type of manipulation, that they too were manipulated in this type of rhetoric. And right now they're spending it and using it and selling it to you like it's the final education. It's the smart way. It's the intelligence. That's what studies are saying. That's what they will tell you. That's what studies are saying, where it's one's personal interest, where it's different philosophies and interests, but at the end of the day, it's you that matters. Love thyself. And of course, as long as you feel pleasure, as long as it makes you feel happy, that's your way of recognizing that it's worth you. Don't let anyone confuse you and tell you otherwise. It's you that matters. Now, you might say, well, yeah, I'm worth, they're telling me that I'm worth. Why are you telling me otherwise? I'm not telling you you're not worth. In fact, Islam is actually telling you that even the breaking of Mecca itself, the Kaaba, once after another, is not worth one Muslim innocent person's life. In other words, Islam regarded that the second most important legal maxim is really human life. In fact, we know that part, but the way that it's actually presented is in order to manipulate you, in order to blind you from seeing that there are certain things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded as the purpose that preceded your existence. So when we talk about Sharia, it's not to necessarily whatsoever to disregard your individual rights or your individual needs. In fact, Islam, the reason why marriage was regarded halal was because it wanted to regard that you've got an individual need that must be fulfilled. It didn't disregard your fitrah. Sharia is all about focusing on one, your deen, two, your nafs and your health and your worth in terms of your life worth, etc. And three, your aql and mental health. All of that is regarded as sacred in Islam. Now, the way that it's presented is totally different. That's the narrative sold, not necessarily the reality in practice. I'm just saying the way that they would sell their narratives. Number two, existentialism, where it's basically telling you that everything is absurd and meaningless. So therefore, your human mind is the center to determine senses, to determine pleasures, to explore the world, to create a meaning. and a value and a purpose of your life. So what is your purpose, girl? Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. My purpose is to feed the people in Africa. No, I mean, that's not a purpose, but that's okay, that's a tool. The purpose preceded your existence. That's not a purpose. But then they'll basically, I want to be a singer. I want to be an actress. I want to be this. And here's one thing, is that what you're actually seeing in existentialism, it's the culture where it's selling a purpose. It's selling that making you, the individual, be the new idol. You be the new idol. You just speak in a way where it's your individual purpose, and therefore your hawa, your desire, would be the new God in order to determine the purpose. But here's one thing, in Islam, your purpose preceded your existence. What came first? Is it the eye? Or is it the reason why the eye was made? Which one came first? The reason that made, that reason that determined what it wants to make the eye for is why you've got the eyes. Your hearing. Was the idea of hearing first, or was the ear first? The idea of hearing first. Was the purpose of life first, or was life first? The purpose of life. And that's exactly the same thing, where just this little rationale, just this little argument right there is to contradict that existentialism is actually false, because you don't create a purpose, but the world itself was founded on a purpose before the world was even existing or existent. Now, that's extremely important. What you're seeing right now, in where a lot of these thoughts are sold in, especially psychology, in different arts, in different parts and fields of academia, they're actually sold like the recent education. What is happening is that a lot of times they'll tell you, studies say this. What many don't recognize is the absurdity even in the way that they would actually present their own works. Now, they would regard that everything is absurd and meaningless in this world. So therefore, you have to create your own meaning to success. You create an expression to yourself. You would create, and you would go against religion, and you would go against culture, because it's your only way to create a meaning to life. It comes with the idea that it's the survival of the fittest, and the fittest is usually the one that goes against the common practice of the majority. The survival of the fittest, in where it is really presenting that the fittest is the one that revolutes and goes against the common culture and goes against everyone else, because they'd be the ones that are successful. Only the stupid ones would be the ones to be practicing religion, being backward, and therefore the ones to actually get lost in not being successful. That's why you would actually see in, I'm just going to go faster, inshallah, you would see in a lot of feminist thinking, where feminism, and you've got psychology, liberalism, anthropology, most humanities, they would be infiltrated by feminist thinking, existentialism, liberalism, individualism, and without them recognizing, or even with them recognizing, but the Muslims, many Muslims don't recognize, but those that are actually within the system are the ones to determine for the masses the textbook that you need to study. The ideas that I want you to regard as educational. Is it a conspiracy? It's actually open. This is not me somehow inventing this. This is straightforward. This is not a conspiracy. If you mean by conspiracy as hidden, this is not hidden. But most of us are unaware of it. Most Muslims are unaware of it. When most Muslims would go into the university, they go into the university and they would think, well, the professors, they're going to present to us the education. And most of the students are actually thinking that, well, this is based on education, and not recognizing the indoctrination and the ideas that are behind this marketing called education. The feminist ideas, in where it's all about, hey, we should not have the man be in our society. We should not have the man control. Men, ladies, you have been throughout your life, you have been abused by the patriarchal system and so forth. And without you recognizing, when the words are repeated too many times, without you recognizing, you will start believing them. You will start believing them. It will be, you know, in Palestinian culture, we actually say ittala in ma basibash bidwish. What does that mean? The gunshot, even if it didn't hit the target, it would still block your ears from its sound. And that's the same thing. Even if it didn't necessarily make you part of that system, it will still block your ears from hearing otherwise. You see what I'm saying? It will start, and it will make you blasted, with blasted ears from even recognizing what just happened. Where did that come from? And without us recognizing, that's where the challenge actually comes in, where the society would actually speak of, you are morally right if the society accepts it, whether we're talking about politics, whether we're talking about human rights, LGBT, women issues, abortion, modesty. And within the past 12 years, we have a wave of ex-hijabi, wave of ex-Muslim, wave of LGBT that are supported by Muslim activists, feminist active Muslims, a wave of using phrases, hijabi police, haram police, and judgmental, wave of emotional da'wah, in where it's really sad to say that a lot of the famous da'iyat and dua and whatever are actually not specialized in Islamic studies, but are actually specialized in communication or specialized in psychology or therapy or whatever it is, and they become the replacement of those that are actually specialized in Islam. What are we really seeing? It's really sad to admit, and I'm really appalled by this. It's really sad to admit that what we're seeing is that the Muslim society is actually disrespecting and not honoring its own scholars. What we're seeing right now is really the same exact thing that's happening in the Western community is happening in the Muslim community, where we're replacing our scholars with motivational speakers. Motivational speakers. Why? It's all about emotions, not the argument. This is the trend, the challenge that a lot of the Muslims are actually facing in the West. The challenge is not realizing the campaigns that shape their understanding of what makes and what is presented as knowledge. Still do it again. The challenge is not realizing, if you were to actually put the whole lecture in a nutshell, this would be the phrase. The challenge is not realizing the campaigns that shape the Muslims' understanding of what is presented as knowledge. That's the real challenge. Why are many Muslims falling in that crack? It's because just like Fir'aun, he presented it like he was trying to bring in civilization, justice, and certainly because he wanted to present himself like he was the pioneer of human rights, many actually fell in it. Right now, in an age where it basically is proud and presents itself like it's the age of knowledge, the age of education, the age of science, it will present you a lot of the indoctrination as if it's an education. What studies say. What you don't recognize is that there is a lobby. There are lobbies, there are secular systems, there are media outlets that are getting paid by lobbies in order to present to you what they want you to believe. And what you don't recognize is that even the education system is basically within that. Now, here's one thing. I wanted to lay out one thing is that there are different types of confusion or different types of atheism. And what I mean by atheism is I want you to look at this one because you've got, yes, there are some within the society that will say that there were atheists, but it's not really like that always. I want you to look at this right here, this colorful slide. You've got one type, which is actually probably 1% or even less, the absolute atheist that deny the existence of God and believe in the evolution theory and that life is matter in motion. I want you to look at this. This is a very important slide. You've got the semi-atheists that believe in God but deny God's relationship to creation. You've got those that are actually embracing nihilism or nihilism, the rejection of all religious and moral principles, and in the belief that life is meaningless. You've got the transitional and the temporary atheists. They would be confused, and that's especially amongst the youth. All right. You've got the other type, which is the atheist that research. They would regard doubt as the base of research. And you've got the retaliation, or those who are retaliating atheists. They would hold that religion is responsible for all the pains and react in ways of retaliation against everything that religion stands for. And then you've got the revolutionary atheist. He wants to, or she wants to revolute against every principle the religion stands for because they would regard that the religion is the reason behind all the pains that the society is bringing in. And they will, of course, many times the universities will actually claim that, hey, all the wars throughout history were actually waged by religion, and forget that the world wars were not at all religious based. There's the blackmail and the pressuring atheism. It's used by the youth to pressure their parents to give up on certain principles to gain materialistic or moral benefit. Do they necessarily really believe in atheism? They just use it in order to blackmail their parents that I want to get my way. The show-off atheists, to gain attention by standing out. I'll do a piercing, I'll do all these different things in order to show that I'm somehow a critical thinking, I'm a person that is smart. The bullying atheism, in where to gain popularity by bullying other religions. And this is something that a lot of times in universities, and especially the professors would use this type. Cornering students, they'll use this bullying atheism by cornering you with all these questions and will not even give you the time to answer questions or even respond to their claims just because they want to use the type of bullying in order to make you lose confidence in rejecting rejecting or even refuting any of their claims. There's the paradigm atheist, in where it imitates certain figures, usually lack self-confidence and self-esteem, but it's basically trying to emulate them. There's the depression atheism, in where they're confused about trauma in the world or trauma that they lived through, so they would reject God because they couldn't understand evil and free will relations. The common challenges of all those that I had mentioned: one, that is trying to impress others; two, that's trying to fit in; three, they're trying to be, we're all the same. So what do? They use the word inclusivity in order to feel that they are fitting in. So they get absorbed by the political correctness, because they're afraid that if they were to speak up in what they regarded as truth, that they might actually be called out as being judgmental, called out as being, or being exposed somehow, like they are backwards, and the list goes on. And it's really sad to even see that a lot of the da'iyas are actually using and falling in that crack. There's the other kind that I did not mention earlier: trying faith as an experiment. Now, it's become very common that many will trial faith as if it's a scientific experiment, not realizing that religion is not as a scientific experiment. So they will use things like, well, I tried hijab for a couple times, it wasn't really me, I didn't fit in. They'll talk about it as if, it wasn't feeling me. In all of this type of language, where somebody will actually say, well, I've actually tried being a niqabi, it wasn't me. I actually tried engaging in dhikr, it wasn't me. I tried to do the community services and engage, it wasn't me. Therefore, they'll actually judge things that it was based on feeling. Now, that's the thing, is that what you're seeing is making of the postmodern Islam in youth. There's the political pressure to fit in, the social pressure to become like everyone else. And of course, the youth or fertile minds to embrace postmodernism. This youth are generally, you could say, struggling between the principles of Islam and the principles of the modern society. Now, peer pressure, it also becomes an issue. I don't want to stand out. I don't want to be called anything else. And then there's the gravity of fitna. Well, everybody else is doing it in a certain way, so what can I do? Then you've got all these different things. Well, you'll be called a hijabi police, or you'll probably feel that you'll say, well, I was part of the masjid, but I wasn't feeling myself. And then the common words where people were being judgmental. So how do I deal with all of these different influences? Well, here's one thing. Number one, you have to start with directing yourself. Abu Hanifa, listen to this, what Ibn Arabi said about him. He said, as for Abu Hanifa, he had made the Quran be the lens that he sees through, and he was capable of seeing the truth. If you want to protect yourself from being indoctrinated by the system that you may know the details and may not know the details, you have to use al-wahi, Quran, as the lens, the binocular, the magnifying glass that helps you take away the blurry vision of all the different things. And remember, the most dhikr as a Muslim you do is Allahu Akbar. What is that constantly telling you? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is superior to all these different agendas, to all these different ideologies, to all these different conspiracies or not conspiracies, whatever is out there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is superior. If the Quran is telling you that this is wrong, know that it's wrong, and then learn how to prove it. Therefore, connecting yourself to the masjid, connecting yourself with the scholars, connecting yourself with learning Islam, with learning Quran, with learning tafsir, with learning hadith, with all of it is the key. It's the light to help you distinguish all those idols and all those blasting sounds that are trying to somehow create the smoke from you seeing reality or creating a blasting sound from you hearing reality. Let Allahu Akbar be the word that helps you recognize how to remove the blurriness of the different visions of things and the murky sounds or the sounds that might actually be confusing for you. Let the Quran be the place that helps you identify the different things around you. But that's not enough. We are social beings, especially women. Emphasize. Yes, that text is infallible, but people are not. And as social beings, you will have girls and people that you might not like in the masjid, but that does not necessarily mean that Islam is wrong. You might have people with an attitude, but that doesn't mean that Islam is an attitude. If you wish to find a role model, you be the role model if you cannot find them. You be the role model. You wish you can find a role model that is in a certain image in your brain, you be the role model that you wish to find. Trust me, what we're going through right now is really azmit qudwat. We're all struggling to find a role model. You be the role model that you wish to find. In other words, what you really want to do is yourself work on helping your mind find a vision and beware of yourself actually being sucked inside the system. So find pious Muslims to associate with. Advocate for your rights on campus. And the rights include the right to have a religious practice respected, and even your ideas. Don't be afraid to speak up Islam. Don't be afraid. And remember, in Surah Yasin, in all the history of the prophets, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why was he telling us all the stories of the prophets? He was telling us, that's how the story began. How do you continue the story? And history repeats itself. Don't be afraid, even if you're the only one in school, to actually say, well, this is the truth. This is what Allah says. This is how to prove it. Even if everybody in class is laughing about you. Big deal. You're not the first one. Remember Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. What was he saying? Ya Allah. Every time I would give them da'wah, every time I would give them da'wah, they would put their clothes over their ears because they don't want to hear anything. And they would be speaking in arrogance. Be careful. Many times people will use the type of arrogance and pride as a psychological tactic to make you lose confidence about what you're saying. It's a psychological tactic. And oftentimes it does work on campus. So you speak in confidence about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and don't be afraid to speak within lectures or even to the faculty and even on campus. Don't be afraid. And remember, when you speak about it, even when others are speaking about it in a condescending manner, know how to write. And this is important. Write it and send it to the provost. Your objection to the president or whatever it is, the dean, etc. Write it to them. Massive emails. Continue. Don't stop, because what will happen is that many students, they're afraid to actually go because they're concerned about their grades. And they'll feel that I might be cornered, maybe I won't get anywhere, etc. It's like, I just want to pass and that's it. No, don't. Be the leader. Complain. Stand up. Complain to all of them. You build your identity. Educate yourself on Islam. If you can't find the right group, you be the leader that you wish to find, and start with making the activity that represents your identity. And of course, if you feel the fitna is too strong, this is going to be the final word. If you feel that the fitna is too strong on campus or university or even in America, girl, find a different place. ألم تكن أرض الله واسعة فتهاجروا فيها. Find a different place. Because your akhirah is more worth. That's why I'm leaving America. I'm going to Malaysia. You guys are not going to see me again. I'm actually leaving in December, inshallah. So what I would want to say, even like I said, consider your akhirah as your priority. Wallahi, life is too short. Wallahi, it's too short. Wallahi, it's not worth it. Wallahi, your akhirah is worth all. Remember these 5 girls that were driving and this car just slammed at them? Was it were they going to this masjid? Dar al-Faruq. Remember these 5 girls? Wallahi al-Azim, it could be any of us. Wallahi, it could be any of us. What is really worth the most is really your akhirah. Is really la ilaha illallah. It could be any of us to be dead next. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحُ يَرْفَعُ. What will really elevate you is not the education. PhDs and all these different labels, wallahi, they are worthless if the heart is dead. If your heart is alive, if your la ilaha illallah is strong, wallahi, that's the only thing. وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. The only thing that will stay is the face of your Lord Almighty. The only thing that will remain, the only thing to be the highest is La ilaha illallah. Maintain that. Work on strengthening that because everything else will perish. And that is your purpose. Now, inshallah, I'll end right here and I'll, inshallah, open the floor for questions, inshallah. And if there are any questions before I leave, no questions, mashallah, it was all clear. Okay, great. Go ahead, my dear.
So I had a question. When I was in class waiting for office hours, I had a little bit of an argument with me and my sister. So she works in one of the libraries. I told her, she told me, she was like, you know, one of the individuals, they told me to call them by Aysha. And I told her that was me in that situation. I would have said, you know, this infringes upon my extent. And I would have said, you know, I'm sorry, I'm not going to call you that, you know. So, and then she kind of was like, I don't want to lose my job, and as long as you feel in your heart that you're against it, like it's okay to form, like, be like, oh, you're they, them, you know.
You know what saddens me? What's your name? Asya. Oh, nice, beautiful name. You know what saddens me, Asya, is to see right now Christians in America having the courage to speak up, but then many Muslims are afraid to say a single word. When you see Jordan Peterson, for example, Jordan Peterson, is that his name? Yeah. He was, although I don't, of course, right now, you know, he is, I guess, given the other face of himself, but may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give him guidance, Allahumma ameen. When he was willing to lose his job just because he refused to use the pronoun and considered that that was not healthy for the society. He's not even Muslim. He's not even Muslim. In fact, so anti-Islam. All right, so anti-Islam, willing to lose his job. When we see that non-Muslims are more courageous to stand up for their principles, and when Muslims are afraid, I'm really concerned. I'm really concerned. Saying, no, wait a minute, you want to be inclusive to my opinion as well. You know, I was invited to, when I was at St. Catherine, invited to join as a chaplain, to join the groups for the queer and the LGBT in order to be inclusive and all of that. I refused. Reject the invitation. So I sent a whole article explaining what Islam's view on all of this, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created people in male and female, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Islam is all about living social justice as going in parallel with the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created nature. And then I called my boss and I said, listen, you want to fire me after this? By all means, fire me. I'm ready. Here's what happened. The response was that the university, in fact, the vice president, emailed me back and said, well, this is what Catholicism teaches, and thank you very much. You will actually be respected for your views. Thank you very much. You also deserve to be respected and deserve that your point of views to be tolerated as well. You've got your views, and they have their views, and we're going to embrace all. It's all about, here's the thing. When those that are weaker started speaking with full audacity, they made the masses afraid to speak up. But when you start speaking up, trust me, there are many out there that would want to speak up, but they're afraid. You be the leader. Aysha, get the inspiration from your name, girl. What did Aysha bint Muzahim, what did she do? When Fir'aun, she was the queen. She was the queen, but then she had to say the truth. Even if that meant losing the prestigious status that she was in as a queen. And even if it meant putting her life on the trigger. To her, I'm going to say the truth, because all of that perishes. Rabbi, najjini min Fir'auna wa amalihi wa najjini min al-qawmi al-zalimin. So what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give her? A baytun fil Jannah, a castle in Jannah. Stand up for truth. Don't be afraid and speak up. Even if you were going to lose a job, or you're going to, because what is at stake? Remember, rizq, that's why we believe in the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's in order for us to remember, rizq is by Allah. They don't give you the rizq, Allah gives you the rizq. Al-Izzah. If you're afraid that you're going to get humiliated, Al-Izzah lillah wa li rasulihi wa lil mu'mineen. Al-Izzah is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not by them. They don't give you the honor. The honor is not by the degree. The honor is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wallahi, in honors from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You hold on to Allahu Akbar. Wallahi, al-mu'min yahabuhu kulla shay. Everything will fear a believer. That's the true honor. It's not the degree. Stand up. What gave Malcolm X the honor is La ilaha illallah. The Sahaba, the honor, La ilaha illallah. The Muslims, the Arab, what gave them the honor was La ilaha illallah, nothing else. Nothing else. If you hold on to the izzah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wallahi al-azim, wallahi al-azim, Rabbil Alameen will give you izzah. We're an ummah. If we seek izzah through other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether that's called a degree or whether that's called a social status, whatever it is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you adhallan Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will humiliate you. So speak in izzah, speak in the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you will see. You will get the izzah. Any other questions? Go ahead, my dear.
So I had a question. You know how we were talking about you should always speak the truth, regardless of like fear of losing your job or like failing a class or anything. I feel like because fear is just a humanly emotion that Allah created us with. I feel like we need like a certain level of trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be able to speak the truth and like just have full trust in him. What would you recommend doing to reach that amount?
So I love it. So here's the thing. when we actually talk about fear, there is the natural fear, and where we're afraid of probably afraid of something dangerous, something that might attack us. This is the natural fear. But the fear, when you give up on Islamic principle in fear of probably rejection or retaliation or whatever, that's the fear that is manbooth. That's the fear that Islam was always telling you not to fall in. That's why believing in the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's creating, you're redirecting your vision from afraid for dunya to actually getting the right fear in place. Taqullah. That's taqwa. Don't be afraid. Stand up, don't be afraid. Uqsim billah al-azim, there's nothing to be afraid of. Wallahi al-azim, Rabbil alameen, he's the one that gives the rizq, he's the one that gives the honor, he's the one that gives you that level of getting whatever you are actually in need of life. That's why all Anbiya and all those Salihin, when they actually went into that level, it was only through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وجاء رجل من أقصى المدينة يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين. This man, he just that one thing came far and he just said اتبعوا المرسلين. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still mentioned him. It was worthy. اتبعوا المرسلين means let's take that path and follow that path. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all, and you are all inshallah leaders. Inshallah, you will all be leaders. You will all be the ones to not be afraid and have the izzah to stand up and speak of La ilaha illallah. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad and jazakumullah Allah khairan. I'm very proud of all of you. Very proud of all of you. MashaAllah, I can actually see the nur in your faces. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve you all. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make you all be the leaders to lead the society. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make you all those that will always be firm, steadfast on haqq and truth, and make you amongst those that will see the truth as truth and follow it, and see the batil and the manipulation as a manipulation and abandon it and stay away from it. Allahumma ameen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if he doesn't join us in this place again, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala join us in Jannah. Allahumma ameen. Ameen. All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa iyyakum.
To the sisters sitting in actual chairs, I have you guys return them back to the classrooms that are on the far right wall of the building. To those of us that came from the masajid, if you can